Shabbos. This week is last Shabbos in lockdown. So it's appropriate to give the following message. As we look forward to coming back to Shul this coming week, the Medrash asks the question, why is it that God asks Noah to make an ark? He could have saved him many other ways. Could have taken him up to heaven, could have bring him to the Garden of Eden, where like Adam was, could have taken him to Israel. And according to many opinions, in Israel, there was no flood. Why did he have to command him to take make an ark? So one of the reasons given in the Medrash is so that when people ask him why he's making an ark, he will tell them that God's going to destroy the world and this ark is for me to save myself. The problem with that answer is it didn't work. He didn't get one person on board. He was a colossal failure who followed Noah's advice to change their ways and therefore be saved. And think about it. At first, when Noah started making the ark, he had no children. For 20 years, Noah was working on an ark before his children were born. So he's thinking to himself, I'm making this ark, this big ark, to save whom? Myself, who have no children. He's 480 years old. And he had no children. Now, those times, the age that they had children was 100, not 480. So he probably thinks that he's not even having children. So the people he's making the ark for are people he's going to convince. And he didn't convince anybody. So there must be another reason that God would have told Noah to make this ark. Now, another question is, this ark has a strange name in the Torah. Generally, a ship, a boat, is called either Oniyah or Sfina. We find this in the Chumash and the prophets. By Yonah, he was going on a Sfina. Zvulun is blessed to be in the harbor, Chof Aniyot, where the Oniyah resides or comes into docks. Why is it that we use teva, which really means a container, a box? And the reason is, says the Baal Shem Tov, expanded on by the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe and so on, is that teva actually means a box, meaning a container of ideas. Teva is also used for a word. A word is called a teva. And why? Because a word contains concepts and ideas. And so the Baal Shem Tov says that each one of us can live through our own floods, can live through our own stormy waters. And in order to live through that in a positive way and be lifted by it and saved from it, we need to enter into the words of davening and to the words of learning. When we enter into the world of davening and learning, it safeguards us from the raging waters around us, from the difficulties in earning a living. You know, the terminology we use with difficulties in finances is I'm underwater or I'm treading water, etc. The terminologies that relate to a flood. And entering into our ark, what is our ark in these sometimes challenging times? That is the words of Torah and Tefillah. Why? Because when we enter into those words, we start getting a different perspective on life. The Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, had an uncle. He was called Uncle Yossele. They relate with regards to the Yossele. He goes to the mikveh. And a mikveh in a Jewish community was the place that everyone spoke politics and spoke about how to conduct the world. And in the mikveh, there's other guys there, they're showering, bathing, etc. They're fighting over the, whatever mandates or whatever issues are relevant at the time, about the wars and about the Tsar and about all kinds of political issues. And he is having this heated debate with someone else who has an entirely different perspective to him. And finally, he says, you know what? We're going to continue this debate. Come to my house for a piece of kugel, Erev Shabbos, before Shabbos. Come to my house for a piece of kugel, and we'll continue our debate. And we'll solve the world's problems. He goes, he leaves the mikveh, and he comes home. And as he goes home on a Friday afternoon, he was a spiritual person, and he starts learning, and he reviews the Sedra, and he reads different commentaries. And he's already in a Shabbos mode, in a Shabbos mood. All of a sudden, he hears a knock on the door. And he opens the door and says, yes. And he says, I'm the fellow in the mikveh. We decided we're going to continue our debate over a piece of kugel. He says, you met Yasala from the mikveh. This is a totally different Yasala. Once he engrossed himself in the words of Torah, he was a different person. When Noah went into the ark, he could have had, imagine living in an ark, second story filled with all kinds of creatures and animals, and the bottom story is for waste. Imagine the odor. It would be a smorgasbord of scents that weren't exactly uplifting. And Noah was responsible to feeding all these animals. He would have had a hard job in the ark, living there without proper sunlight, without getting out into the environment for an entire year. That would have been very difficult. How did he do it? How did he get over the circumstance that he was in? The answer is very simple. He thought to himself, what are my options? This is much better than being out there in the flood. And as such, he was grateful. He was so thankful to be saved in the ark and not be out there being destroyed by the flood. And so it is when we go into the words of Torah and Tefillah, that gives us an ability to have a perspective and to change our perspective on life. That when things seem harsh and difficult, we're grateful. Now, we were locked into our homes and we could debate the policy. I'm not going to get involved in that, value judgment one way or another. But we should be grateful where we live and the fact that we are safe. We should be thankful for our blessings. And the way we are helped to have this attitude is through the words of Torah, which emphasizes these ideas again and again. Parenthetically, a few people shared with me in the last couple of weeks amazing stories just of this nature. There's one fellow who tells me his daughter started a business, and she makes these acai bowls and things of that nature. And she was looking for a place to run this business in the city. And she was knocked back 5 times. They almost were going to sign. And for whatever reason or another, they raised the rent or other things didn't work out. And it was extremely frustrating and very upsetting. Again and again, they're trying to get the business going, and they don't have a place of where to run it out of in the city. But finally, she decides they're going to rent a little place near where she lives in some kind of a shopping center, which has, obviously doesn't have the foot traffic of the city, near a butcher shop and near a Woolworths or a Kohl's or something like that. And what could you do? That's what you have to do. He says to me, thank God that happened, because if we opened in the city is a ghost town. We would make no business, and their business is actually thriving where they are, much more than expected. So here, what you thought was a curse was actually a blessing. Another fellow was telling me how he had a contract, and the contract was coming up, and he didn't know if they're going to renew it or not, if they're going to continue with him in this contract or giving him another contract. So he didn't know what to do, so he looked for another job. and he found another job. And then they came back to him and says, we're going to renew your contract. Now, normally that would be impossible. He can't be in two places at once. But now, because he was in lockdown, he's working from home. He took on two jobs. He works much longer. And it was a great blessing for him because beforehand he had told me that he thinks he's going to have to leave the country because he has so many debts and he will be away from his children. It was a disaster. The ability for him to have these two jobs at once, and because he doesn't have to go into work, he was able to work both jobs at the same time, gave him the ability to start paying off his debts. There was a young boy who was very kind. He had his bar mitzvah right after Simchas Torah, and therefore his bar mitzvah this year would have been a Shabbos Bereshis, the first Shabbos of the year. There was another boy who wanted that date from his school. And so he gave up the date to another boy, and instead he did Pashas Lech Lecha, which is in 2 weeks. And what happened is, Pashas Lech Lecha is the first Shabbos, the shuls are open. He'll be able to have his bar mitzvah. If he did it Bereshis, he wouldn't be able to. So we think something is bad, and it turns out to be the greatest blessing. How do we have this perspective? How we help to have this? Through going into the words of Torah and Tefillah. When we learn Torah, we get an insight into things that are taking place, how really Hashem is guiding us and helping us. I'll conclude with the following. Nathan Sharansky, in 1973, he famous refusnik. 73, he gets married to his wife Avital, and the day after their marriage, she has a visa approved to go to Israel. So she takes her opportunity and she leaves a day after the wedding. He imagines that he'll be able to leave, get papers not long thereafter, and he'll meet her in Israel thereafter. But instead, the Russian government did not allow him to leave. For 3 years, he was fighting and trying to get Heter Yetzia, to get a visa to be able to leave Russia. And instead, he became a refusnik. And after 3 years, he was put into prison. Right before he was put into prison, and he was sentenced for 13 years, right before he's put into prison, he received a package from a tourist that came with a package from his wife. In it was a little black tehillim. And so he took that with him. He thought maybe that could be comforting. However, as he gets to prison, they take it away from him. And he's fighting to get it back for 3 years. After 3 years, one jailer has mercy and gives him back his tehillim. Now he gets the tehillim a day before he receives a telegram that his father passed away. So once again, the tehillim came to him in the most opportune time for him to be able to pray out of this tehillim, to find comfort in the words of King David. Now he wanted to actually learn and understand the tehillim, but of course it's poetic and it's sometimes difficult. So he started really working on it and taking this little small tehillim, he wrote it out in bigger words and on larger pieces of paper, until he came to one verse that really lifted him incredibly. Even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me, for Hashem is with me. And the realization was, he's not here because the communists put him here. Hashem is with him wherever he is. That gave him the fortitude, the ability to withstand the interrogations that he went through for hours and hours, and the days and weeks that he spent in solitary confinement. That book of Tehillim, those tevot, those words, those containers contained the messages that gave him strength his entire life, to the extent that today he never goes anywhere without that little tehillim in his top pocket. And that's what we get from our ark, the words of Torah and the words of Tehillah. So make a resolution as we go into opening to learn more, to come to learning, and to come to shul and daven, because that will be your ark from whatever raging waters might be out there and give you the perspective to see that everything that happens is not only from Hashem, but it's Hashem's blessings to us. Good Shabbos.